I open the joint meeting and call the parish council meeting to order.
I hit the gavel, and I call the city council meeting to order.
We welcome you to the special joint meeting of the Lafayette Parish Council and the Lafayette City Council. As presiding officer and parish chair, I would like to announce the following. This is a public hearing. To address the council on any items on this agenda, please fill out the speaker form to submit your information to the clerk prior to the call of the agenda item, or you will not be given the opportunity to speak. Staff is available if assistance is needed. Items for submission to the council should be handed to Council Clerk Mrs. Veronica Williams, seated to my left. When addressing the council, state your name and title for the official record. The 3-minute rule will be in effect. No debating or confrontational statements will be allowed. Any interruption of this lawful assembly is prohibited and will not be tolerated. The front row to my left is for media only. Food and drinks are not allowed in the auditorium. Please silence all phones and electronic devices. Meeting procedures are by resolution and not Robert's Rules of Order. All documents with reference to meetings can be found on the LCG website. And finally, the council encourages your involvement in boards or commissions. If interested, call 291-8800. Reports and/or discussion items. Jeremy, please read.
2020 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report of Lafayette Consolidated Government by Burton Colder with Colder, Slavin and Company, LLC.
Both mics are hot if you need to.
And while they set up, you should have been provided with the exhibits that they will be reviewing.
We did. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbo and Ms. Cook and members of the council. We appreciate y'all having us here today to present our results and some of the summary findings of our report and for the year ended October 31, 2020. Of course, as you know, you've probably gotten this. It's 293 pages of the comprehensive annual financial report. We took some certain excerpts that we felt were good to be presented here today and to express certain views and results of our audit for the prior year. So that being said, Brian and I are going to go through, I think there's like 8 exhibits or 7 exhibits, and we wanted to go through those. I will cover some, he will cover some. Let me start by saying that this report on, I think it's page 3 or 4, indicates our opinion on these financial statements based upon our audit that we've conducted for the year ended of consolidated government, and it is a unmodified or what we call clean opinion, meaning that it's not modified in any kind of way, which is what the bondholders want to see and the regulators and raters of the bonds want to see as well. So that's a good thing, and I wanted to point that out. We had some management items that we presented to management in our meeting with them. We've had a meeting with the management group, Ms. Cook and Mayor President Guillory and his staff, and we had an exit conference with them. We then had an exit conference with the 2 finance chairs of each body and met with them and went over the findings as well, and then we're here today to present the findings over to the complete council. So that being said, and of course, let me just mention this, if you have questions that you have as we're presenting this, please feel free to mention those and ask us, and we'll certainly try and address them. So that being said, we're just going to start with the exhibits. As Veronica indicated, we gave them to her last week. I think that she submitted to you at that time. And so consequently, you may have had some opportunities to review these in order to go ahead and possibly develop some questions. What we present on Exhibit 1 is the general funds of both the city and the parish. And of course, it's comparative. You have the results or the revenues and expenditures of the city general fund, which is for 19 and 20. In the middle 2 columns is the parish, and then of course the totals of the 2. So I wanted to just kind of go over some of the high spots here. Ad valorem tax, you see, I'm going to focus on the city first. The ad valorem tax was $25,149,000 last year, and it's $25,520,000 this year, about a $400,000 increase. Sales tax. Now, remember, the sales tax going into the city's general fund represents 35% of the total sales taxes collected by the city. This is per the sales tax ordinances and or dedications that were approved by the voters. So this represents 35%. Last year, that 35% was $28,667,000. This year, it's $27,906,000. It's a reduction of $760,000 from the prior year. Considering what happened this past year with the pandemic and so on, it is a fantastic situation because I think originally Lori and her staff, we even projected as much as maybe a 20% reduction. We didn't know, nor did you. No one here knew what was going to be the results. It ended up at $760,000. That's 2.65% less than we had last year. And as I said, as I recall, Mayor, I think we were projecting somewhere around 20 or 21 initially. So to be at 2.65 is fantastic. Let me say this, we audit most of the cities or all of the cities in this parish. And the city of Lafayette was down 2.65. The city of Broussard was down like 3.1%. All of the other cities were up, believe it or not. Now, they have different fiscal years. Most of them have June 30th. Dusson has December 31, but Dusson's was up as well. So that's great for our overall parish economy, and it's certainly representative of the good economy that we do have here. So going on with the items, payments in lieu of taxes, the pilot payments as we always call them, coming from LUS was $24,679,000 this year. It was $25 million that was sent over to the general fund last year. Communications brought in $767,000 in payments in lieu of tax payments, and it was $800,000 last year. Most of the other items, if you go down the page in the city, most of them are very comparable. If you look at that, if you just scan those, very comparable. So total revenues for the city last year coming into the city's general fund was $100 million. This year, it's $98,380,000. Basically, it's because of the reduction in the sales tax, which we talked about earlier. A slight reduction in the pilot payment coming from LUS. The expenditures, how were the money spent? Well, we spent $20 million on general government last year. We spent $21 million this year. Public safety, remember there were some increases that were approved by the previous administration, I think, went into effect in this current fiscal year. It was $64 million of fire and police protection services last year. Is $70,860,000 this year. Public works is very comparable, $3.8 million versus $3,797,000. In total, the total expenditures in the city's general fund, $88,872,000 last year. It went up to $95,785,000. As I said, with the increases in public safety for both police and fire, that is attributable for the increase that you're seeing here. The excess of revenues at this next line item went from $11 million last year down to $2,594,000 for the current year. Now, let's look at the other financing sources, which is coming from other sources, transfers in, internal transfers or internal allocations to the parish, from the parish into the city. First of all, the transfers. Last year was only $1,515,000. This year it's $18,811,000. What that represents is about $17 million that came in CARES Act monies. Those go into a separate fund, a federal grant fund that is provided, and then those monies are shifted based upon what those federal monies were for. And here, CARES Act was all for public safety. Okay, so the 17 million of that 18 million is coming from that, and of course 7 million of it was used for police and fire, and the remaining 10 million was set aside in October the city council set it aside, and it's committed for future expenditures for police and fire. So that 10 million was still sitting there at October, okay? I don't know where we stand now. I can't address that. But if anybody has any questions on that? Okay, the transfers out, that's going out to other funds from the city's general fund was 12 million this year. It was 14 million last year. The internal transfers, and if you look at the parish, reading on to the far right, you can see it's in brackets, the same numbers, because it's transferred from the parish to the city as an allocation of cost. And as a 25-point system that's used for certain accounts within the accounts of the general fund that are allocated based upon those 25 points, depending on the type of account, and that's how those allocations are computed. They're saying some of those expenditures are paid by the city but pertain to the parish reimburses it, okay? And of course, Ms. Toops and her staff could certainly show you this. This was addressed by MGT consultants, and they gave you some of the criteria that was used in trying to address this situation. It's nothing new. It's been done in the past, and it's being done again this year on the allocation of cost. Bottom line is, when you add in that 18 million or 17 million from the CARES Act, we left with a net change in fund balance in the general fund of the city. It increased by $14 million. But as I said, 10 million of that was then set aside and committed by the city council. So basically the net amount after the CARES Act is taken care of and set aside, it's about $4 million surplus in the city's general fund. And you can see last year was $4,207,000, okay? The fund balance, which is, of course, your reserves, that's the total fund balance. But the uncommitted fund balance, and that's not shown here, uncommitted, unreserved, unrestricted of the city, you have available, or the city council has available, you have about 231 days of general fund operations available in your reserves. What should you have? What's recommended? At least 60, preferably 90. You're at 231 days. So you have significantly more than what is basically recommended. As it compares to last year, we were at 159 days. So we're now up to 231. Any questions on the city general fund operations for last year? Okay. Hearing none, we'll go on to the parish general fund. And here, the ad valorem tax, as you can see, $4 million both years. The sales tax for the city, for the parish, went up from $4,885,000 to $5,304,000. So with this pandemic, for most of the year, of this fiscal year, the sales tax of the parish went up 8.6%. That's phenomenal, considering what we were faced with, or we didn't know what we were faced with. That is very, very good. And as I pointed out, only two of the governmental bodies within the parish, the city of Lafayette and the city of Broussard, had a slight reduction. Everyone else had an increase, which is fantastic. The other items in revenues for the parish are very comparable if you look at those. And the total revenues, including the sales tax that I just talked about and the property tax, total revenues in this parish general fund was 12.9 million last year. It's 13.1 million for the current year. The expenditures, again, very comparable: general government, public safety, a little bit there, and minimal amounts on the culture and recreation, health and welfare, and economic opportunity. But the total last year was $6,498,000. This year, $6,563,000 for the parish. The excess of revenues at this line item was $6,448,000 last year. It's $6,633,000 for the current year. And of course, when you look at the transfers in and out, but the biggest item is the internal transfer from the parish general fund to the city, which we just talked about, of about $5 million. Total financing uses transferred out was $6,057,000 this year, $5,777,000 last year. And net change in fund balance was positive last year. It was a positive change of $670,000. This year, it's $576,000. Again, very good considering the type of year that we encountered last year. And the number of days for the parish, I'm pleased to report that we're up to 2 months, guys. We're up to 60 days. Last year, comparable, 27 days. Remember what I said? You should be at least 60, higher the better. So that's a good sign. We're on the uptick in the the parish general fund and the general fund reserves. Any questions relative to these numbers? Yes, sir.
Hold on, let me give you the, Mr. Lazard? Okay, go ahead, sir.
Josh was up first. Go ahead.
Josh?
I'll defer to you. No,
Go ahead, Mr. Lazard.
Very hot.
You're hot.
Burton, what? Am I on?
Yes?
Burton, why aren't we showing anything for the categories of culture, these 3 categories for 2020? Culture and recreation, health and welfare, and economic opportunity.
In the city's general fund?
Yeah.
Well, you don't have any expenditures out of that general fund. They're expended in other funds, which are special revenue type funds for the city. This is only the general fund.
Okay.
You see, that's why. The general fund didn't expend any of those monies for either of these years out of its general fund. It was expended out of the special revenue funds.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Okay. Mr. Carlson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Calder, I think whenever you met with the Finance Committee and we went over this, you had mentioned the possibility of the Parish Council looking at an ordinance similar to what the city has enacted, where we, I guess, self-impose a requirement to have a certain number of days operating expenditures that we set aside, and we're not going to, can you kind of speak to that and kind of give your thoughts on that?
I would definitely recommend that, Josh, if we could do this. I know the school board here does it.
What does the city have in place? Do you know?
I don't know how many days the city has in place. Is it 90, Laurie? Or it's kind of an unspoken type thing?
I definitely recommend that it be updated. I want to think that we started off with 20%. I think we've learned in South Louisiana with our susceptibility for hurricanes, and now we've experienced our first pandemic. I think we know that that number's got to be larger than 20%. Finding what the best balance is something that I'm happy to work with you to explore. But certainly
20%
of expenditures.
of expenditures,
Right.
okay?
But as I said, in South Louisiana, being able to respond to hurricanes, drainage issues, and along with the pandemic, look at all the storms we had last year during the pandemic. I don't think 20% is really adequate anymore. How high that should be is something that I think we certainly need to discuss. Remember, the general fund is the main operating fund of both governmental units, the city and the parish, whereas the special revenue funds for roads and bridges and drainage, we're budgeted to use all of that money, so that money there is not available to respond to emergency events.
Yeah, your only avenue, I agree with Ms. Cook, that, with Laurie, Ms. Toops, is that that's the only avenue you have when you have certain extraordinary type items, let me just say that. Right. To recommend something to you, Josh, I would recommend at least 75 days.
Okay.
All right?
Do
So
you know what
2.5
the school board
months.
has in place? Do you know how many days the
School board had 90, they reduced it down to 75.
Okay.
And so they are operating with 75. But they have it earmarked, and every year when we report to them, we tell them how much, and they know how much it is, but it's a significant number.
Right.
But 2.5 months of available reserves is what they have. And I would recommend at least that here, and possibly a little more. If you could go 90 days, that would even be better. And like I said, the school board started at 90, dropped it to 75.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Lazard, did you want to make? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So from the, and this is directed to both Burton and Laurie. So from the standpoint, Laura, you saying 20%?
That's the old one, yes.
Okay, so from that standpoint, what does 231 days represent in terms of a percentage? Yeah, exactly.
You have that balance sheet, Brian? Let me see.
$63%?
Yeah,
63%?
it's,
63.2%?
I would say that's probably about right. It's about $57 million that you have, Glenn, in the reserve that's unassigned in the city's general fund. And I would agree with Josh, it's probably somewhere around 60. Yeah, so we're 3 times where we probably, she's saying 20, but she's saying it's probably too low at 20.
Well, now, we just recently took a large chunk of that money and set it aside for drainage. So this was at October 31st of 2020. Today, I think 20 million of that has already been set aside for drainage.
Really? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, so we're down to maybe 40 days, 45 days right now, as what you just spoke about.
Yeah, but the one-time capital expenditures, that's easy to explain to the rating agencies. That's what they recommend you spend your excess fund balance on. And after all the rain and the flooding events we recently had, it was decided to take that money and use that.
That money's already been moved, Laurie?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
One of those there is. It's set aside.
Additional questions?
Go ahead, sir.
All right, if there's no further questions on Exhibit 1, let's go on to Exhibit number 2. And Exhibit number 2 is, and if you look up at the top in the headings, this is the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance for the governmental funds. And the governmental funds, we broke them out because there's been some discussions, a lot of discussions on this, of the city funds being used by the parish or vice versa, and so on. Ever since the inception of this government, the different funds or account groups or sets of books, if you would, were kept separate from day one. So we have the 2 general funds, but we have quite a few special revenue funds for the city. You have 19 to be exact, that are dedicated for certain purposes, funded by property tax, funded possibly by some other tax or some other mechanism. And then you have debt service funds that are required to be funding for the payment of the bonds. Capital projects funds, you have those. They're all kept separate because they're for city or for parish, but kept separate since inception. The parish, on the other hand, has, of course, its general fund. It also has 18 special revenue funds, funded mainly by some property taxes or certain other dedicated type of revenues. So, and then debt service as well as capital projects. So up at the top of this, I put city funds, and there's 30 city funds here that are reported in these columns. And this is all governmental funds because the LUS fiber, all of these are separate and all city, they're all pertaining to the city. They're not included here. All we have here is the non-enterprise type funds, and the city has 30 funds. We've recapped this based upon, because we have it all set aside and you have separate sets of books, so we are able to do this. Then the parish, we have 21 funds, and then there's joint funds. There's 4 joint funds. Those 4 joint funds are the Road and Bridge Maintenance Fund, which is funded by city property taxes and also parish property taxes. The administration maintains when they spend city monies, it has to be spent in the city. When the parish spends monies on road and bridges, it can be spent in the city of Lafayette, in the parish of Lafayette, in the city of Broussard, or the city of Scott. Doesn't matter. It's parish. It's all parish. Okay? So they're keeping the integrity of all of that and maintaining that by projects. Okay? Then we have the other federal grants set of books. You have other state grants and other grants is what they're calling them. So there's three others that are all pertaining to grants. When the grant monies come in, they're put in those funds, depending on what they are, federal or state or whatever. Then as the monies, just like we said, the CARES Act, that all pertained to the city. So those monies were transferred to the city, okay? And so keeping the integrity of the differences between the city finances and the parish finances has been from day one of this government. It's been kept. So I wanted to point that out, and that's why we presented this, so that you could see of the total revenues in the governmental funds. As you can see, the city back on Exhibit 2 is $164,821,000. That's all city monies. The expenditures were $193,774,000. You can see that column. And of course, then there's some issuance of debt, but all pertain to the city in this respect. The parish funds, they brought in $71,646,000. Included in that is the 13 or so million that we talked about in the general fund. That is included in these numbers. That's all of them. That's all governmental funds. So if the parish was operating on its own with just these funds, this is what its total revenues would be, $71 million, okay? Wanted to point that out because I said that there's been a lot of discussions about this, and I've been asked a lot of questions. Are they commingling? No, it's not. It's not commingled. It's not commingled. The only allocations, or the allocation that we have, is what we talked about in the general fund, where it was computed and so on. So I just wanted to point that out. And up at the top on this exhibit, you see it says page 21 per the audit. This is 21 out of this big book here, okay? And all I've done is broken it out between city, parish, and joint funds, as we called it. Any questions here?
Any questions, council members? Okay, sir, continue.
All right. Hearing none, let's go to exhibit number 3, the communication system. Again, pertaining only here to the city. As you can see, communications had a good year again this year. Last year, its revenues were $41.4 million. This year, we're up to $43.2 million. Over on the far right, we've got the variance, $1,831,000 increase in revenues. And I've said many meetings ago, and Mr. Nake, you probably remember this way back when you were on the parish council, when this was in the infant stages, and I had made the prediction then that once we reached the point that we were covering our fixed costs, we would have some incremental cost when you increase the volume because you have new customers, but it's not represented. We're still making more money on the bottom line. And this proves the point again this year, like it's proved in the past. Operating expenses last year were $30,500,000. This year they're $31,059,000. So our operating expenses only went up on the far right $543,000, but we generated $1.8 million in revenues. And then you have non-operating revenues and expenses. It nets out to about $68,000. But the income before any transfers was income increase from $6,009,000 to $7,230,000. It's an increase of $1.2 million. So with $1.8 million increase in revenues, we're dropping $1.2 million to the bottom line. So 2/3 of that number is dropping to the bottom line. And as additional income that we've made or change in net assets, and it's increasing our fund balance or our reserves. So you can see the profit this year or the change in net assets, $7.2 million for the communication system versus $5,998,000 last year. And of course, as you know, we've had a deficit over the years that's been accumulated as this system was built and as it began to accumulate and take in customers. But our net deficit, our net position now is down to $30 million. And what I've put down at the bottom, the change in net position, the profit, so to speak, was $7 million. The non-cash expense, the depreciation, because we've paid for those assets, we're now writing them off as we use them, $7.8 million. That gives you adjusted change in net position, or that's available with cash, is $14 million. Well, beginning in 2022, the debt service for the communication system is going to be approximately $10 million a year. Well, if we're generating $14 million, we should have plenty of money to pay for that debt service. That's principal and interest. You can look in the report. It's about $10 million beginning in fiscal '22. Okay? So again, a very good sign here for the communication system. Any questions?
Council members, any questions? Okay, sir, continue.
All right. Brian, I think you're going to handle Exhibit 4.
Yes. Good evening, Council. I'm Brian Jobert with Coder Saving Company. I'm going to go over Exhibit 4. Exhibit 4 is the comparative statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in fund net position for LUS, your enterprise fund. First one I'll go over is your electric. You can see on the far left side of the exhibit, you have your electric department, then you have your water and your sewer, and you have comparative totals for 2019 and also 2020. For your electric department in 2019, your operating revenues ran at right about $178 million. They did go down in 2020, where you ran it right at $165,391,000. Overall, your expenses for the electric department for 2019, they ran right at $153 million, versus in 2020, they ran right at $146 million. And look at the bottom line for your electric department. After you collected your revenues less your expenses, you end up with a net operating income in 2019 right at $25 million. In 2020, that line item was right at $20 million. So you had excess revenues over expenses of right at $20 million for 2020, and that's after you paid your payment in lieu of tax to the city general fund. And that payment for the electric department for 2020 was right at $18,260,000. On the side of that one, you have your water department. Your water department total revenues for 2019 came in right at $21 million. For 2020, up slightly, it was $21,206,000. Your expenses for the water department ran in 2019 right at $21,356,000, and those were down in 2020. They came in right at $20,062,000. Overall, your net income loss for the water department, you see in 2019, you actually had an operating loss of right about $775,000. In 2020, you end up having excess revenues in that water department of right at $1,143,000. So quite a change around from 2019 to 2020. Your sewer department for 2019, your operating revenues ran right at $31 million. 2020 down slightly, it was right at $30,400,000. Your expenses for the sewer department in 2019 right at $29 million, and then in 2020 you came in right at $28,087,000. So expenses were down as well in the sewer department. Your overall net income for the sewer department in 2019, you end up with $1,784,000 of excess revenues, whereas in 2020 that did increase at this line item. You came in at $2,309,000 of excess revenues. And again, that money is just available for future capital improvements and to make sure that the system is operating in the most efficient manner. Over to the far right-hand side of the exhibit, you have the total for all three of those services. 2020 total revenues for all those services right at $217 million for all of those. For your expenses, you came in right at $194 million for all three, giving you an overall excess of right at $23 million for all three services. Below there, you have some non-operating revenues and expenses, mainly your interest expenses and some other items, but your net overall for the year for all three departments, you came in right at $16,283,000 for LUS. And again, that's after a transfer of the payment in lieu of taxes to the city general fund of right at $25 million for the year. Any questions on this exhibit?
Any questions, council members? Okay,
Thank God for LUS. I mean, 25 million is going into the general fund and a reserve or an ending balance after that transfer of $16 million.
If you want to turn to Exhibit 5A.
Excuse me. Councilman Lazard, you have the floor.
I'm not sure this question can be answered tonight or not, but in any event, occasionally we have situations where we sell water outside of the city limits. And we're often told that whenever we sell, customers outside of the city limits pay a premium or pay more than customers, LUS customers, inside the city limits. We've never actually gotten a price. I'd like to know if we can get that information, even if it's not readily available today, I understand, but if we could get that information, I'd just like to know what the difference in the cost is.
Now, we do sell wholesale water, I know, to North Lafayette, South Lafayette Water, and possibly to Milton as well, huh, Mayor? Milton. But the other two definitely have it, and also Youngsville buys water. I think Broussard may buy water. Scott buys water. So, yeah, and those rates are probably a little bit less than what the residential would be here.
Municipalities has been in place for a while, but I believe Councilman Lazar was asking individual customers of LUS.
Yeah.
We'll get that.
Yeah.
We can call Jeff, he'll get it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks.
Okay, let's continue.
Okay, we'll move on to Exhibit 5A. 5A is a schedule of your per customer per month. So this is just an average charge of what an average consumer is paying per customer per month for your different services of electric, water, and sewer. It is just a rough average, but it is consistently done for all years that are presented. So it doesn't take in consideration commercial or residential. It's just one group number. For your electric for 2020, you can see you have right at 69,364 consumers that are on your electric system. With that, the average consumer in 2018 was paying right at $222.83. In 2019, that was down to $216.57, and in 2020, down even further to $198.70. So that's what your average consumer was paying. Your operating costs for electric, $203.19 in 2018. That was down to $186 in 2019 and down to $175 in 2020. The last line is the operating income or loss on the average consumer. 2018 right at $19.64. 2019, went up to $30.26, and then in 20, it went up to $23.65 for the electric department. Your water department, you had an average of right at 57,412 consumers as of October 31st, 2020. With that, your average consumer in 2018 was paying right at $31.37, went up to $29.41 in 2019, and up to $30.78 in 2020. The expenses related to those revenues in 2018 right at $30.96, went down to $30.52, and then down to $29.12. With that, your average net income or loss per customer in 2018, you're averaging right at 41 cents per customer. In 2019, you actually had a loss per customer of right at $1.11. And then in 2020, you're up to $1.66 per customer in 2020. Your sewer department, you had an average of right at 46,133 customers as of 2020. Your average revenue collected was right at $58.66 in 2018. It did go down to $56.46 in 19, and then in 2020, $54.91. The expenses related to those were $51.95 in 2018, up to $53.20 in 2019, and then down to $50.74 in 2020. The excess revenues over expenses at this line item for the sewer department in 2018, right at $6.71. In 2019, $3.26, and then 2020, $4.17. Again, those are monies that are available for future capital improvements to maintain all three of those systems. If you look to the far bottom of the page, you can see the totals for all three services. And if you look at the very last item, your operating income for all three services, you're at $26.76 in 2018. It went up to $32.41 in 2019, and then down to $29.48 in 2020. If you take the average of all three of those years, the average consumer over the past 3 years paying right at $29.55 per month for all three of those services. And you see that's very close to the 2020 number where they're paying $29.48.
Again, that's the operating profit, to make sure we clarify that. That's the operating profit that was on the system. This year was $29.48 of all three, and the average for the 3 years was $29.55. So very, very consistent.
Any questions on Exhibit 5A?
Council members, any questions? Absolutely, Ms. Cook.
Yes, I just have a question about customers. It looks like our electric customers have gone up, our sewer's gone up, but our water is fluctuating. Is that probably a question for LUS, or?
Yeah, it would
Okay.
have to be.
I don't know if that was something y'all were privy to, no? Okay.
Then we only take the numbers right at October 31st, or for that month, and that's what these numbers represent. So it's
Okay.
not an average of anything like that for the number of customers. So LUS would have to
Have to
address
answer
that.
that, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, sir, let's continue, Ron.
Okay, if you want to go to Exhibit 5B. Exhibit 5B is scheduled for your environmental services, which is a garbage, pretty similar to what we just saw for electric, water, and sewer. For 2020, your average customers were right at 39,352 customers. On average, paying right at $33.81 in 2018, up to $35.12 in 2019, and up to $35.65 in 2020. Your operating costs were right at $32.54 in 18, went up to $33.80 in 2019, and went down to $33.24 in 2020. Overall, your excess revenues over expenses per customer, right at $1.27 in 2018, up to $1.32 in 2019, and then up to $2.41 in 2020. And during this fiscal year, I think it was the first of the fiscal year, y'all did have a rate increase for the garbage. I think it was right at 58 cents per customer that y'all enacted a rate increase. So that number is reflected in there for a full year of those services. Any questions?
Any questions, council members? Okay, Exhibit 6.
Exhibit 6. Exhibit 6 is all the enterprise funds that are related to the city of Lafayette. This is taken directly from the 300-page report. You see on page 27, it does reflect the same information. So it's just to show you all the various enterprise funds that are within the city of Lafayette. It shows LUS Communication System, Lafayette Public Power Authority, and also your other enterprise funds, which is your environmental services and your CNG service station. In total, your total operating revenues for all of those funds, right at $315 million for all of those enterprise funds. And something just to consider, if you look about the third to last item on the page, the second to last column to the left, the change in net position for all five of those funds, you ended up with a excess of revenues over expenses of right at $26 million for all of those enterprise funds. And again, that's after paying right at $25 million of your payment in lieu of taxes to the city of Lafayette.
Okay.
Any questions on Exhibit 6?
Council members, any questions?
Very healthy position there. I want to just comment on. The last exhibit is Exhibit 7, which we'll cover. And I just want to make some comments. We kind of summarizing everything. We just looked at it. Brian went over that it's about $315 million, if I recall, for the LUS, Communications, and Environmental Services, as well as LPPA. And so it's about $315 million. And if you look at the revenues here on 2020 on Exhibit 7, I just want to point this out. $622 million is the total revenues for this total government, which, as we talked about, about half of this is the enterprise funds, and another 180 million or so is city funds, which we talked about in Exhibit 2 approximately, and the balance would be the parish funds. So you're probably talking about 80 to 85 million that would be parish funds, and the balance would be city, both LUS or enterprise-related funds and general and other governmental funds. It's a big responsibility that both of you council members have here because you're the curator, so to speak, or the in custody of these assets, and it's your responsibility as a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that things are done, and of course you rely upon your administration to do that job and help you do that job. So, but you do have a big task ahead of you, and you have had it in the past. And I just wanted to point those things out. So any additional questions?
Go ahead, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you. Yes, you mentioned about $622 million, and you said the parish have about $88 million?
Approximately,
and about
yes,
what
sir.
would be how much would be the city then?
The city would be the difference, Pat, of about, what, 540 million?
I just wanted to say it
Yes.
out. I just want to make sure everyone understands about how much.
540 million would be approximately, which
Right.
is city,
Right.
and the balance of about 80 million would be parish.
Okay,
That is
thank you.
correct. Yes, sir.
Any other questions or comments from the council? Councilman Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just for the benefit of the public, you're our independent auditor, right?
That is
You don't
correct.
work for the parish council, for the city council, but
I
you're
work
here
for
to,
both, but I work for both councils.
right, to
That's who
independently
appoints us.
audit and verify our books.
Correct.
Perfect.
And we don't verify every transaction, as you might imagine,
No,
Josh. I
absolutely.
mean, you have quite a few people that do this. We select samples and then extract information from that and
That's
make
right.
certain analytical items from those items and reach a conclusion based upon our work.
But you verify that what Laurie says we're spending and what we have is
Right.
accurate.
And we look at also that, that it's being spent in the manner in which the funds were restricted or dedicated to be spent.
Right.
We do that, absolutely.
Voters approved it to go for this intended purpose.
Right.
You're actually spending it for that intended purpose, and whether it be a city or a parish.
Or a parish.
Right.
We audit the funds or the sets of books. You have about 60 some odd sets of books here.
Right.
So it's like auditing 60 different companies, if you might look at it that way. Some of them are small, but some of them are quite large.
Right. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Carlson. Mr. Lewis?
Yes, sir. Just for the record as well, how long you guys been doing this independent audit for?
I
the
think
city
we've been
parish?
doing it for 13 years, Pat. I believe that's correct, somewhere around
About 13
that
years, huh?
area. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Anything else?
Mr. Mayor?
Hey, I just wanted to throw my 2 cents in. I know being a new mayor president, working with this firm has been very helpful. I know we're in our first fiscal year of new government. We haven't even gone through a full fiscal year in a new government with 2 councils. It has been tedious at times, and I will say relying on you guys has helped out a lot. I know the councils probably agree with that. So a lot of work has been done. I believe that ensuring that city dollars don't go outside the city and parish dollars are spent the way they're supposed to spend is a very tumultuous task at times. But having an ally and partner does help us with that. So we all appreciate you, and thank you, councils, for your questions.
Good. Council members, any other comments, questions? Okay, gentlemen, we appreciate the presentation, and
I
if you
would
want
like
to
to
close.
thank the mayor and his staff, and Laurie and her staff, and these 2 councils for allowing us to work with you again this year. It's always a pleasure. We're hoping to continue the relationship in the future.
No.
Thank y'all.
Thank y'all.
Okay. Okay. Next item, Jeremy, you want to read for us?
Louisiana Watershed Initiative presentation by Acadiana Planning Commission.
It's not clearing. And I don't have it over here. Anyway. If you would, introduce yourselves for the record.
Yes, absolutely. Rachel Godo, I'm the Community and Economic Development Director for the Acadiana Planning Commission, and I have my colleague here, Kelia Bingham, and we are leading the entire initiative for Region 5 of the Louisiana Watershed Initiative. And I want to thank you all for having us back here. I think we presented maybe last year or the year before, and so we want to give you an update about what the work that has transpired in the last 2 years, and then what you can anticipate coming in the next couple of years. So just for those in the public who are not aware, Acadiana Planning Commission is a commission of the state. We were enacted by the legislature for multi-jurisdictional planning efforts for shared problems within the region. And our board is made up of the 7 parish presidents from Acadia, Evangeline, Iberia, Lafayette, St. Landry, St. Martin, and Vermilion. And depending on the initiative that we're working on, our boundaries can fluctuate. Louisiana Watershed Initiative, we're managing 16 parishes, and again, it fluctuates depending on the initiative that we're working on. So next slide, Kelia. One of the major challenges with the Watershed Initiative, and we recognize, Acadiana Planning Commission does, is that you guys are the first defense. Y'all are the frontline defense when it comes to flash flooding or drainage issues, and you get the calls on a daily basis. And what we would also like to communicate is that there's an entire state effort behind the work that you guys are doing, and that you can lean on and hopefully rely upon moving forward in the future. Not only state, but also regional. And there's conversations happening all across the region with these 16 parishes about the interconnectedness of the waterways and how we manage our waterways moving forward. Louisiana as a whole has been reliant upon typically federal dollars for disaster recovery efforts. And again, the disparities are different between urbanized areas and rural areas, right? The capacities are different, the resources are different. And so the urbanized areas are traditionally more forward-thinking and have the resources to be able to move forward, where oftentimes our rural areas get left behind because they don't have the same type of playing field. So what I want to communicate today is that we recognize that the challenge in Louisiana, as we drain the entire Mississippi River, we have just significant amount of water that we have to deal with. We are also one of the flattest states in the entire country, and every parish has some sort of shared risk in this in Louisiana. Our flood risk is obviously increasing with rainfall rates, and especially during heavy rains events, and you can see that in the last couple of years. And the big message here is that water doesn't obey political boundaries. I know it's cliche to say that, but it's true. We're interconnected by waterways and by hydrologic unit codes, and we need to think in that sort of way, and so move toward this watershed planning effort. Next slide. So in 2016, the governor formed the Louisiana Watershed Council, which is made of the 5 state agencies that you see here: CPRA, GOSEP, DOTD, Louisiana Wildlife and Fishery, Louisiana Office of Community Development, and more recently, the LWI has been engaging other federal and state partnerships, like at the Army Corps. The Army Corps is now appointing a regional coordinator for each of the regions, which is huge and significant to be able to work with an Army Corps rep for some of these projects, as you know. They're also working with DEQ, USGS on various initiatives. Next slide, Kelia. As you can see here, so the state is divided, according to the Louisiana Watershed Initiative, to manage the $1.2 billion into 8 different regions, 8 different regions for planning purposes. And so we represent Region 5, which has 5 major water hydrologic unit codes, or HUCs: Teche, Vermilion, the interactions with the Atchafalaya, and then the Mermentau and Mermentau headwaters. So those are the 5 watersheds that we are managing, or coordinating. And kill the next slide. And so some of the guiding principles of this entire initiative, and what you guys have done very well here in Lafayette, is putting the science behind a lot of the decision-making processes. And so we're trying to replicate a lot of those processes elsewhere in the entire region. Obviously, we want to ensure that there's transparent and objective decision-making, maximizing our natural function of our floodplains, and then obviously the regional water management component. Next slide, Kelia. So what has occurred with the 1.2 billion? You'll see there's 6 different elements of the program that is being implemented. So not only are we setting up a program, but we're also implementing it at the same time, which is very difficult. Many people think it's slow. It is slow, but it's in our minds, it's really fast because there's a lot of moving parts here. So you have the local and regional watershed projects and programs, the state watershed projects and programs, the watershed monitoring, mapping, and modeling, the non-federal cost share assistance, the administrative cost, and then the watershed policy planning and local capacity assistance. And I'll break down what those components are. Next slide, Kelia. So the local and regional watershed projects and programs, what you've heard recently is that there's been $100 million available to round 1 is what it's being called. 60 million was selected by the state, and then 40 million was to be selected by the regions, and we're working through that process currently. Out of the 60 million, LCG was awarded the Coulee East Detention Project, the flood storage was selected by the state. Again, that project was about 4.73 million, and there were other projects that were submitted that did not meet the cost benefit that the state conducted. Next slide. Oh, and particularly on that, rounds 2 and round 3, there will be more dollars available for the city and the parish to apply for different projects that may, be in the works. In year 2022, round 2, you can expect about 200 million available for projects, and then in year 2024 for round 3, you can expect about 271 million. And that's for the local and regional projects. Then you have the state watershed projects and programs, and these are projects that have been prioritized by the various state agencies that sit on the council and or maybe some of the federal agencies like USGS or the Army Corps. So the state projects and programs in phase 1, there was a total allocation of 163 million in flood risk reduction. You can see in Region 5 that we were awarded 5 of the 15 projects throughout the state of Louisiana. I think we got probably within Region 5 a fourth of the share of the entire state. So that was about 43 million. And then again, in the state projects and programs, you have phase 2, which we estimate is about 165 million based on the numbers before. So that will be selected again by those state agencies participating in this program. Next is the watershed monitoring, mapping, and modeling. And the effort that next slide, Kelia, the effort that we have undergone, or the state has undergone, is developing out a river and rain gauge network for the entire state of Louisiana. And so you'll have a combination of stream flow gauges and then stage gauges to measure water levels, and it'll connect the entire state, and the state will publish this information publicly for the community to be able to utilize and view. The other element of this funding allocation is the watershed modeling program, which you can see in our region. HDR Engineering is the modeling team for Region 5, and what we anticipate is that there will be about $20 million available for this modeling effort. And what I would like to emphasize is that what the region is advocating for is that these models be made publicly available so that we can utilize them according to our needs. Then, next slide, Kelia. And just quickly on the modeling, what I understand of where the team is at is that they're scoping out the work to be done. It's being submitted to DOTD for review, and then we anticipate models will be made available sometime between year 2022, 2023. It might be a little ambitious, but I think it can get done. Next slide, Kelia. So the non-federal cost share assistance component of this program is, next slide, Kelia. As you all may recall, in 2017, 2018, there was an allocation of 25 million for the region, where 9 projects were allocated throughout Acadiana area. And so from the LWI program, OCD has agreed to match those projects at 25%, meaning that the entire 100% of the cost of these projects will be funded. So the parishes, will have to come out of pocket for reimbursements, but they will get reimbursed back the full 100%. Next slide, Kelia. And then the last component, and what we want to ensure to communicate today, is the Regional Capacity Building Grant Program. This is part of the administrative cost. Next slide, Kelia. So the LWI program activities within the Regional Capacity Building Program, so Region 5 is managing these 16 parishes that you see here. And again, it's the 5 HUCs that I described earlier, Tesh, Vermilion, Atchafalaya, Myrmidon, Myrmidon headwaters. And the watershed, for those who are not aware, it's just the interconnectedness of all the water bodies within a given geography. So it's tributaries, the riverine areas, the connectedness, not necessarily by political jurisdiction, but by how the water flows. So we want to ensure that we're collaborating from that perspective. And then next slide, Kilia. What we have developed through the Regional Capacity Building Grant Program with APC as the coordinating entity is a steering committee of 19 members that you see here. And within the steering committee, there's 3 different subcommittees to do a lot of the work, the legwork that's needed to make those critical decisions. And so one of the major decisions that we have before us, and next slide, Kilia, is the governance component. So in a lot of the conversations that we've had over the last year, how do we sustain all of these programmatic elements that are coming from LWI moving forward in the future? And what we have concluded, and this is the 19 committee member, is that, and I say concluded, the process that we walk through, next slide, Kilia, is what is the work to be performed? What is currently not being conducted within an entire watershed? And how do we ensure we're not duplicating efforts, but we're coordinating and supporting the efforts that are already occurring within the watershed? The second exercise that we underwent was who continues to do this work? Because there's no guarantee that we will continue, Acadiana Planning Commission will continue moving forward. But that is kind of the recommendation that is being made that you'll see here in a little bit. And then the third process that we went through is to identify how this will get accomplished. So at this time, Kilia, if you want to hand out the one-pagers that we have on governance, and I'll just continue moving forward.
If you would hand it to Ms. Williams, please.
Yes, thank you. So it's night reading, good night reading for you all. You can, participate in the survey and or provide feedback or comment to us at a later date. But I'm going to quickly highlight some of the recommendations that are being made by this committee. And so for you to know, Lafayette Parish is represented by Jessica Corney, and we also have Pam Granger on the steering committee as well as an APC appointee. So again, we looked at the gap in services, what is the work that we would like this entity to perform on behalf of the region. And the 4 major elements that we reviewed is the planning and development, the project implementation, data and modeling, outreach and engagement. And so within planning and development, what we've heard from the parishes and the committees and the parishes that are represented on this committee is consistent watershed-based floodplain management. The second thing is develop a regional watershed mitigation plan. The third is promoting the CRS user group, which Lafayette is very active in and has experienced significant flood insurance premium reductions because of the participation in the CRS. But Lafayette City, Lafayette Parish is one of the only entities within the entire 16 parishes that is participating in this program. The other component of this is project implementation. So again, there's the feedback that we've heard is representative of both rural parishes and urban areas. So the capacities within these differ greatly. And so when we talk about project implementation, we also discuss the coordination with local entities on a regional level, providing planning and technical assistance, as well as funding for regional projects, and seeking out external funding opportunities. Because again, what we've experienced is that typically those entities with more capacity and resources at their disposal in that moment typically are the ones to receive grant funds ahead of everybody else. Where in reality, the problem might not necessarily be in that parish. It might be elsewhere, but they don't have the capacity to even apply for the grants that are available or the funding or to put the modeling or the engineering that is required for a particular project. So that's where the data and modeling comes in. We, as a committee, are recommending to the state that these models be housed regionally, and I guess the alternative would be that the state manages these water models. But we'd like proximity. We'd like to ensure that it's here in our region, that it's tangible, and that we have working relationships with those that are managing it. And then again, just emphasize that that be made publicly available. The other component is the operations and maintenance of the regional gauge network. So we've setting up deploying this entire statewide network, and at some point there will be a transition for what does long-term sustainability look like. In regards to outreach and engagement, and again, this is a 2-year process in a nutshell, but so I'm trying to give you a high-level overview. But the outreach and engagement component, ensure that there's public awareness of the National Flood Insurance Program and the CRS program and the benefits of participating in that, and what are those risk reduction measures that need to be implemented to buy down your insurance premium and increase your ability to withstand flood risk. We also would like to support and facilitate coordination for a CRS user group. New Orleans, Baton Rouge, other areas across the state have these groups available, but Acadiana area does not. And so we would like to facilitate that role on behalf of the region. And then lastly, and what I would commend Lafayette City and Parish for doing is the collaboration that you guys are putting together for drainage issues, pulling the municipalities in together. We've participated in many of the Lafayette Parish drainage-wide meetings, and that's not happening across the region in every parish. In some areas, you have 9 to 12 different local gravity drainage districts, all with competing interests, all with different resources available to them. And through an assessment that Louisiana Watershed did on the existing entities with some sort of water management responsibility in Region 5, they concluded that there was about 400 entities within the 16 parishes that have some level of water management responsibilities. And again, the idea is to ensure that there's coordination among these entities. Next slide, Kelia. So again, when we talked about the gap in services, who is the entity responsible for this? What has been recommended within the steering committee is that Acadiana Planning Commission continue to facilitate this role. And what I'll tell you is that this recommendation is also being replicated throughout the state of Louisiana. MPOs and or planning commissions are stepping up to fulfill that role and or being recommended to fulfill that role on behalf of the region. And then additionally, there's going to be partnerships that need to be developed, and we need to iron out what that looks like, but considering a component for UL Watershed Flood Center and ensuring that there's capacity within the region to provide the data, the science, the modeling that's needed, and then working with the Tesh Vermilion Freshwater District as a water quality component. And what I'll tell you here is that there's a model in Florida right now that has water management districts throughout the state of Florida, and essentially that's what the state of Louisiana is trying to replicate, that there is that coordination regionally that's occurring. So what I'd also like to ensure that you all understand today is that in legislative session 2022, the how component will be ironed out. So there will be some sort of proposal in legislative session 2022 essentially enacting these management districts to be formed, to generate potentially long-term sustainable funding, to plan and implement projects for natural disasters, develop response plans, and then have the indemnified authority to implement those said plans. Last slide, Kelia. So just next step, again, and the target goal is in 2022 that there would be some sort of recommendation. In July, each region's APC will make a presentation to the Louisiana Watershed Council based on the recommendations and the feedback that we're getting. So again, we'd encourage you guys, and the reason why we're making these announcements is so that we can have full participation in the process and comments and to get the feedback needed to refine the recommendation. And last slide, Kelia. And so we're here, Rachel and Kelly are available for any questions, not only today, but moving forward. And we'd like to maintain open dialogue with you guys throughout this process.
Great. Okay, we'll turn it over to the council members. Councilman Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Godo, thank you so much for being here and coming and making this presentation for us. I really appreciate it. I have two questions kind of on different topics. So the first one, you mentioned the initial $100 million that was allocated throughout the state, and that roughly $5 million was allocated to each region for that entity's governing body to decide on a project. I think the Cooley-Mean project was selected. What was the criteria used for that decision out of all the projects that were, I guess, submitted to LWI, and some were selected, some weren't? if it wasn't selected, what criteria were used to look at those, remaining projects to determine how that $5 million was going to be spent?
So we have not walked through that process yet. So the
I thought you
5
said the
million,
5 million had been.
it hasn't been
Okay.
allocated. The
So we still have
60
$5 million of that initial 100 million?
Correct.
Okay, well then, what criteria will you use to make a decision on that project?
So that is a very fluid answer. That what we're being told by the state is that essentially there's alternative projects that are being programmed out for us to select.
Will they take,
from that?
for those alternative
list.
projects, and I don't want to cut you off, I know I'll forget my question if I don't. Will you take the full list of all of the LWI projects that were submitted, take off the ones that were selected and already funded, and out of those remaining projects, will you select which one will get that $5 million?
So right now, we have 3 projects basically designated as alternatives.
Okay.
The state also.
Can you tell us what those projects are?
Yes. Killia, do you have those? Okay. We can get that to you.
Okay.
But there's 2 up in, there's one up in Alexandria, one in St. Martin, and then, I don't remember where the other one was offhand. But essentially, Avoyles Parish.
Kalia, if she can, so
speaking
the
about-
audience could hear.
I'm sorry. The last project that's being recommended by the state, it's a potential joint project between Region 2 and Region 5, and then it's Avoyles Parish.
Okay. And do you have to select one of those projects being recommended by the state, or do you have full autonomy to decide, here's all of the applications that were submitted for the LWI? Yes, the state is recommending one of these 2, but we see a third or fourth that we should consider as well.
So part of working with the state is that we remain flexible. And so last week, yes, we would have only had to select from those 3 alternatives that were programmed out. But this week, we received notification from the state that they're allowing additional flexibilities. So we might have more options available to us depending on if a project is above the threshold, which is 5 to 6 million, which we receive. If they can come up with a local cost share, if there's like that balance. So if it was a $6 million project and we wanted to allocate the entire $6 million to one project, they would just have to come up with a difference.
So I know you've,
if that makes sense.
This is the second time I think you've mentioned the cost-benefit analysis. What other factors are being considered in making that determination? Because I'll give you an example. So sometimes there isn't a cost-benefit in that. So you can't look and say, well, there's 100 homes that flooded before, and this project would keep those 100 homes from flooding and figure out what that dollar amount is. But I know in the case of our parish, so Verrat School Road, every time it rains, Verrat School Road becomes impassable. Well, there's no cost benefit to that project.
Right.
But leaving a major artery, to one of our municipalities passable during a rain event certainly would be a substantial benefit to that region, even though there's not a dollar amount of how many people or how many homes are saved. So
Right.
Can you kind of speak to that process, or what other factors are being considered?
So our committee took about 6 months to go through like an evaluation, to come up with a project evaluation matrix that we would grade these projects. But how it's materializing is that there won't be enough projects for us even to consider going through this process. And so Thursday, we have a committee meeting to really discuss, because it's not APC making this decision, it's really our committee. So our subcommittee on projects is going to evaluate, do we accept what the state proposes in terms of just the alternatives that have been programmed out, or do we walk through the flexibilities that have given us and utilize our project evaluation matrix to come up with that. But at the end of the day, that evaluation matrix, what it considers is what is a regional project. So we're not necessarily doing a cost-benefit analysis per se to see which is the most bang for our buck at this point, because it's $5 million. Right. $5 million can at best get you maybe one project. Right. And so at the end of the day, I'm going to lean on the committee to really make that decision moving forward on how best do we accept what the state is proposing for the $5 million, or do we go through our own process that we've worked on for the last 6 months and look at what are we defining as a regional project? Because we can't consider any new projects, we can only consider those that have been approved by the state. So we're very limited in what we are allowed to do with this 5 million. And what I'll also just reiterate what we've communicated to our steering committee is that this 5 million in my mind is a test. Because there's round 2 and there's round 3 where there's larger pots of funding that are going to be made available. And so we're working through, the key is the process here.
Can you share that matrix with us?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
If you can share it with the council office, I'm sure there are other people up here that'd like to see it. And I think, as you mentioned, having a better understanding of how these decisions are being made is important now with 5 million, but it's going to become exponentially more important for regions and different municipalities and entities who are submitting projects to know how to structure projects,
Right.
especially as more money becomes available in
Right.
round 2 and round 3.
And what I would say is that if the state were here today, they would probably communicate that they would like to wait for the models to be made available for these projects to be vetted. Will that actually happen? I can't guarantee that because it's all a timing thing.
So that's a perfect segue into my second question. So you'd mentioned modeling. So, and I'm going to use a project that we heard about earlier tonight and just before, at the beginning of the parish council meeting to tie into that. So we've selected a firm, or the state, or you guys have selected a firm who's going to do, state has selected a firm who's going to do modeling for our region. Who is going to update that model on an ongoing basis? So it might be accurate today, but as soon as we complete Homewood Detention Ponds was the project that was mentioned, or we dredge the Vermilion, or we do whatever, who's going to update that model? I know you said the models would be made public, but who is going to update this model and make sure that it's accurate as we go about and make changes, not just at a regional level, but all the way down if the city of Dusson makes a change,
Right.
that's reflected in the region because it does have effects downstream.
Right, absolutely. So I'll speak to how the MPO does it for transportation.
Okay.
Is essentially the MPO, which is underneath our organization, facilitates a modeling process for the urbanized area. And so they go through modeling updates every 5 to 10 years, and there's a lot of effort put into ensuring that the models are QA, QC'd, and maintained. And so we have an engineer and on staff that typically does some of this work, but we also contract out major model updates to private companies. So how does that translate into watershed? We anticipate there's several different options, and again, this is why the recommendation that we're making to the state is so critical, is that we could propose to house it regionally, and that there will be some sort of shared partnership. Again, do we utilize the MPO process to do the modeling regionally, or is this going to be managed by the state? And I think there's a lot of state decisions that are being made, and if you would prefer it one way or the other, I would encourage you to make your voice heard at the state, because we're championing for it to be housed regionally, but there's a larger effort for it to happen at the state. So if it happens at the state, I don't know if it falls within DOTD, if it falls within OCD, or if it falls within one of the other state agencies, and that's yet to be determined.
And I don't know that I can speak to where I'd like to see that model housed. I don't know that I have enough information to make that decision. I just want to make sure that it remains updated and
Yes.
is accurate. Yeah, roadways are very easy because they're changed once every 10 or 15 years. Whereas modeling for our drainage systems can change, very more frequently.
Absolutely.
And I want to ensure that someone could choose not to share that model for a localized project, or they could forget to share that model. And I just want to ensure that we don't have someone, a small municipality or a parish or whoever, you said 16 parishes, 400 entities. I mean, we have a hard time keeping track of everything between 10 members on the council, let alone 400 separate entities. I just want to make sure that the $20 million that we spend on a model, which I think is appropriate, remains accurate 10 years down the line. So when we're making decisions, we're doing it based off of accurate information, not what was done 5 years ago or 5 weeks ago, because it's changed so much since then.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we did.
Thank you so much. Those are my questions.
Mr. Mayor President.
Thank you, and Rachel, you guys are doing a great job, not only on the presentation, but your day-to-day operations. So maybe I can add a little information to that. So the goal is to get exactly where you mentioned, Councilman, which is in Lafayette Parish, for example, the Test Vermilion watershed is our primary watershed. Of course, we have the Mermentau to the west. So in an ideal situation where we want to our end state as a region would be to have a model that those watersheds and all our watersheds are up to date, but it's a living and breathing document, meaning that if Scott, Louisiana, who falls in our watershed, does some kind of drainage project that affects the watershed, that data is implemented, the model, the overall model is updated. That's where APC is trying to get to. That's where the state's trying to get to. We support that 100%. Now, one other caveat, the law requires that if tax dollars are used to fund the engineering, it is a public document,
Right.
meaning you do not have intellectual property rights to that. You don't have a monopoly on it because public funds were used. So we're advocating from the administration, I hope the councils agree with this, that there has to be some kind of custodian of this. And it's twofold. One, it's the living, breathing document we just talked about, the model that's updated. The second is there has to be some kind of centralized custodian. Whether Lafayette wants to do it, we'll do it, for the region. But that means anybody that wants access to it, it's a one-stop shop. And what I'd ask our fellow parish presidents and APC to consider at our next meeting would be a resolution in support of that. So whenever that step, when it's appropriate to take, that we'll be prepared to do that. But someone has to be a custodian, and we have to have governments that are proactively giving the information. So if we can get that commitment, then that model that you referenced will get there quicker.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Rachel, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate y'all coming before us.
Mr. Nakane had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Nucky.
No, this isn't for y'all. Thank y'all very much for the presentation. This was in regard to Councilman Lazard's question regarding water rates. I had some information come through from a member of the administration, and Ms. Wingard, I'm sure could verify this, but I understand that the wholesale rates are somewhere just north of $2 a gallon, and the retail rates we pay in Lafayette somewhere around $1.71. So that's a substantial charge higher than our local customers are paying here in the city of Lafayette. So I wanted to make sure Mr. Lazard was aware of that we're getting a good deal as city residents.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Nakam. Mr. Lewis?
No, I just want to make sure I'm understanding what Mr. Nakane is saying, that it's wholesale, so we selling water to, for instance, I think Mr. Burton was saying that to Scott and Broussard?
Well, I don't have.
Yeah, but regardless wherever it
The
is.
wholesale rates are $2.07 a gallon. And local residents here are paying $1.07.
Okay, so the local is, the local.
Substantially less than the wholesale rates even.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Because these are other entities, they can sell water to other,
Correct.
for instance.
And I'm not disputing that. I'm just letting y'all know the city of Lafayette's getting a deal.
Yeah, okay, I just
The
want to make
residents,
sure that the other people that they are selling it to is paying a little bit more.
And naturally, the wholesale rates are presenting a profit for the utility system that way.
Right. Okay, that's
Okay.
fine.
Mr. Mayor President.
And just to add to the conversation, so the city of Lafayette residents are definitely getting a good deal, but they own the assets, they've invested in the infrastructure, so it's a balance. Why don't we do this? Let's follow up with the city council at the next meeting, just to clarify, because you are correct, Councilman, in regards to wholesale rates. I know each agreement with the respective municipalities have their own provisions in their contract, and we can discuss all that. And then to address on point, what does an individual pay? It's going to be different than the wholesale, more than likely, but the information you said was absolutely accurate. We can just add to it, just so we're on the same page, but I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, any further council discussion? Ms. Williams, any public comments?
No, sir. Trying to
Okay,
figure out what button to press to.
All right, adjourn the city council meeting.
I adjourn the joint meeting and the parish council meeting. Joint meeting.
Okay, Lafayette City Council meeting will begin immediately following. Could I see Nan Davis and Megan Boudreau? Nan Davis and Megan Boudreau.